There are three things the best risk teams in banking do every single quarter that prevent model drift from becoming a regulatory finding. Three things, not 30, not some massive transformation program. Three disciplined practices. Most banks do zero of them, and the ones that don't, they find out they have a problem the worst possible way. When a regulator walks in, pulls up their model validation documentation, and asks a question nobody on the team can answer. I'm going to give you the framework right now. Take notes because this is the playbook. I am Sahil Kataria, founder of Flux Force AI, Financial Risk Decoded. Before I give you the framework, I need to clear up a confusion that exists at almost every bank I've worked with. And it's this. Most banks think they're monitoring their fraud models. They're not. They're babysitting a process. Here's what I mean. When I ask a head of risk, how do you monitor your fraud model? 9 times out of 10, the answer is some version of, we check if the model is running. We look at how many alerts it generated. We review uptime reports. That's not monitoring. That's just confirming the machine is turned on. Let me give you an analogy. You're driving your car, the engine is running, the dashboard lights are off. You're moving forward, everything feels fine. But when was the last time you actually checked the oil level? When was the last time someone looked at the brake fluid? When was the last time someone popped the hood and measured whether the engine was performing at the same level it was 6 months ago? That's the difference between monitoring and observability. Monitoring says, is the system running? Observability says, is the system performing? And in the context of fraud models, performance means very specific things. It means precision. How many of the alerts the model generates are actually fraud? It means recall. How much of the actual fraud out there is the model catching? It means drift scores. How far has the model's decision boundary shifted from where it was on day one? These are measurable. These are trackable. And at most banks, nobody is tracking them. The model is running, the dashboards are green, and underneath, performance is eroding month by month. That's not a monitoring gap. That's a visibility gap. And it's the root cause of everything that goes wrong with model drift. All right, here's the framework. 3 steps. I've seen this work at institutions ranging from $5 billion community banks to top 20 nationals. The scale changes, the principles don't. The day you deploy a fraud model, you have a performance snapshot. Your precision is at a certain level. Your recall is at a certain level. Your false positive rate, your false negative rate, your F1 score, all of it. That's your day one baseline. Most banks capture that baseline during the initial model validation. They put it in a report, they file it, and then they never look at it again. What the best banks do differently is they treat that baseline as a living benchmark. Every week, they measure current performance against it. Every month, they generate a deviation report. They create what I call a performance corridor. Think of it as 3 zones on a chart. Green zone. Performance is within acceptable range of baseline. Everything's healthy. Yellow zone. Performance has drifted beyond the first threshold. Not critical yet, but it needs attention. Someone needs to investigate why precision dropped 5 points or why recall shifted. Red zone. Performance has deviated significantly from baseline. This requires immediate escalation. Not next sprint, not next quarter, now. Picture a simple line graph. Your recall rate over time. On day 1, it's at 94%. By month 3, it's at 91%, still green. By month 6, it dips to 86%. You've entered yellow. By month 9, it's at 78%. You're in the red. Without this framework, that decline from 94 to 78 happens in silence. With it, you caught the problem at 86, 3 months earlier, before it became a regulatory finding or a fraud loss spike. That's the power of baselining, not as a one-time exercise, as a continuous discipline. Now, baselining is great, but baselining alone has a fatal flaw. It requires someone to look at the chart. And let me tell you from experience, in the middle of quarter-end reporting, audit prep, and day-to-day operations, nobody is staring at a model performance dashboard. That's why you need automated threshold alerts. Here's how this works. You define the thresholds, the boundaries between green, yellow, and red. And when performance crosses a threshold, an alert fires automatically. No human has to notice. No analyst has to remember to check. The system tells you. But here's the part that most banks get wrong, and this is critical. Where does that alert go? At most organizations, if a model performance alert exists at all, it goes to the data science team. It goes into a Jira ticket, it goes into a backlog, and it sits there, prioritized below the next feature request and the migration project and the platform upgrade. Model drift is not a data science problem. Model drift is a risk problem. That alert needs to go to the compliance team. It needs to go to the model risk function. It needs to land on the desk of someone who has the authority to escalate it to the risk committee. Because when a regulator asks, your model's recall dropped 15 points over 6 months, when did you become aware? You need to have a timestamp. You need to show the alert. You need to show who received it and what action was taken. If the answer is, it went into a Jira ticket and sat there for 4 months, that's a control failure. And regulators treat control failures very differently than they treat model performance issues. The performance issue is expected. Drift happens. They know that. What they don't accept is that you knew about it or should have known and didn't act. The final step, and this is the one that ties it all together. Most banks do model validation annually. Once a year, they bring in a consultant or run their internal validation process. They compare current performance to original benchmarks. They write a report, they file it. And you know what happens in the 11 months between validations? Nothing. That's 11 months of unmonitored drift. 11 months of potential performance degradation. 11 months of evidence gaps. The best banks have moved to a quarterly cadence. Every 90 days, they run a formal revalidation cycle. Not a full rebuild, that's different. A revalidation. A documented comparison of current model performance against the original validation benchmarks and against the previous quarter. And the output isn't just a spreadsheet someone emails around. It's a regulator-ready report with documented methodology, with clear metrics, with a narrative explanation of any drift observed and the remediation steps taken or planned. This is what regulators actually want to see. The OCC's SR 11-7, which is still the gold standard for model risk management, explicitly calls for ongoing monitoring and periodic revalidation. The word ongoing is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that guidance, and most banks interpret periodic as annual. The institutions that get it right interpret it as quarterly at minimum. When an examiner walks in and you hand them 4 quarterly revalidation reports with trend analysis, documented alerts, and remediation actions, that's a fundamentally different conversation than handing them a single annual report and hoping they don't dig deeper. One says, we take this seriously. The other says, we check the box. Let me tell you what happens when you actually implement this. At a bank I advised, mid-size, about $8 billion in assets, they had a fraud model that had been running for 2 years. Good model, performed well at launch. But over those 2 years, they had 3 separate fraud spikes that the model missed entirely. 3 new fraud patterns that emerged, the model didn't recognize them, and by the time the fraud team caught it through manual review, losses had already accumulated. Each spike cost them somewhere between $400,000 and $1.2 million in direct losses. And that's before you count the operational cost of investigating after the fact, the SAR filings, the customer remediation. They implemented this framework. All 3 steps. Continuous baselining against their original metrics. Automated threshold alerts routed to their risk committee, not the data science backlog. And quarterly revalidation with documented reports. 9 months later, 0 missed fraud spikes. Not because the model stopped drifting. It still drifted. Models always drift. But because they caught the drift at the yellow zone every time. They caught it early, investigated the cause, and either retrained the model or adjusted their rules layer before the drift became a loss event. And here's the other thing that changed. Their relationship with their regulator changed. During their next examination, instead of scrambling to pull together documentation, they walked in with a full year of quarterly reports, alert logs, and remediation records. The examiners spent half the time on model risk that they usually did, because there was nothing to dig into. The evidence was there. That's the difference this framework makes. Not because it's complicated, because it's disciplined. So, take these 3 steps, write them on a whiteboard, bring them to your next risk committee meeting, Ask your team, which of these are we doing today? If the answer is 0 out of 3, and at most mid-market banks it is, you now know exactly where to start. Continuous baselining, automated threshold alerts to the right people, quarterly revalidation with regulator-ready documentation. This isn't theory, this is what the top banks do, and it's the operational discipline I'm building Fluxforce around. Aiden Flux handles real-time fraud scoring today. Continuous model observability and drift alerting are next on the roadmap. If you run model risk at a mid-market FI and you want to compare notes on how you're handling this, link in the description. This is a conversation I want to have before I ship the next feature, not after. I'll see you in the next one.